If we can please move to administered items. Minister appearing is the Minister for Education. Estimate of payments, Department of Education, $3,365,421,000. And administered item for the Department of Education, $325,068,000. I declare the proposed payments open for examination and refer members to the agency statements, Volume 1. We have the member for Torrens discharge to be replaced with the member for Badco, and the member for Raynell discharge replaced with the member for Hurdlevale. Minister, if you could update your advisers, please.
To my right is Rick Pearce, who is the Chief Executive of the Department for Education. To my left is Peter Smith, who is the Acting Executive Director for Strategic Policy and External Relations, who deals with a lot of our administered items. To her left is Julianne Riedster, who you've met before. Behind me is Carmine Vitere, who's the Director of Budget and Finance, Department for Education. Next to him is Karen Weston, who's the Acting Executive Director, Early Years and Child Development. And behind them are Martin Westwell, who's the Chief Executive of the SACE Board, who will probably be swapping seats with Peter in a little while, and Mel Watson, who is the Acting Registrar of the Education Standards Board.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Port Adelaide, member for Badco.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Minister, and thank you to your officials for being here today. My question relates to Budget Paper 5, page 27, Budget Initiatives, Operating Savings. So of the $472,000 per year that's identified to be cut here, what's the split between the three agencies, the History Trust, Carclew and Windmill Theatre?
Well, to be clear, the efficiency has been requested of the Department for Education in its role as administrative agency for those three organisations, and in the expectation of what the Department for Treasury and Finance provides us to support those organisations, and so they're providing us $472,000 less. But one of the key reasons and benefits of having those agencies assigned to the Department for Education is that, of course, a lot of the work they do is supporting our school students and young children and young people in child development across South Australia. So we're having a very close look at the moment about the services that those organisations provide to our children and young people and our schools, so that we can more adequately address accurately the funding model. So while there were existing savings to those agencies required of us by former budgets, some from last year's budget, a substantial amount in the 2017 mid-year budget review, which we've discussed earlier at some length in another session, I don't think that this efficiency required from Treasury will end up having a significant, if any, impact on those three agencies, and we're working through that at the moment.
So has there been any determination about how that $472,000 will be split up and saved across those three agencies, or have you not decided that yet, how you're going to apportion it?
I encourage the member to read the Hansard of the answer I've just given, but to answer it in a different way, to provide the same information in a different way. Those agencies receive funding from the state government. It's administered through the Department for Education, and the Department of Treasury provides funding to the Department for Education to assist in the work that those agencies do. They also receive money from the Department for Education directly for certain purposes, and going forward that money will probably increase to meet some of the support that they've been giving our schools and young people. And in relation to the $472,000, there's a reasonable likelihood it'll cover the vast majority, if not all, of that funding. There's also work that schools do, fee for service. There's when children go to, for example, some of the agencies, the museums. There are different arrangements that can be come to. We also have a relationship with those agencies through the education officers that work in those organisations. So there are some efficiencies that those agencies will have to deal with because of the existing budget savings that are determined and expected. But the $472,000 figure is the efficiency that Treasury asks of us to deal with. And in context, earlier we were talking about the savings in the ministerial office budget, which in the first full financial year of the Marshall Liberal Government, I'm informed, were actually larger than the efficiency that the member is talking about covering. So we're working towards making sure that it's covered, because these are agencies that provide important benefits to our school children, every single one of them, whether it's through Carclu, Windmill, some of the support that's given by Carclu to other agencies, and I particularly single out Patch, which was our children's early childhood performing arts agency. And then there's the History Trust, which has an extraordinary range of activities that it does that are very important. And, for example, one of the things that the History Trust is doing this year, coordinating, and one of the things that our government is supporting it to do, is in the centenary year of the flight of the Vickers Vimy, the first flight from England to Australia by the Smith brothers. The committee to celebrate that is, of course, hospiced under the History Trust, and so there's a school essay competition. So those sorts of things are taken into account as well. It's not as simple as saying that there is a split. There's a split in terms of the $472,000 efficiency required of us by Treasury. But if you're asking about what impact the organisations will see of that, I've been speaking with the CEs, the boards of those organisations, and the Education Department has been working towards identifying the true costs and true value of what those organisations provide, and we're finding that it's very significant.
I realise you're trying, and I'm trying to understand what the answer is to this question. I'll just try and be a bit more specific about what I'm after. Can
I offer one piece of information that might help clarify?
Sure, thank you.
So there's this $472,000 which is identified, and as I've said, is unlikely to see any impact because things will be paid for in a different way. There is an existing savings target. There was an existing savings target for all of these organisations prior to the election, left in the mid-year budget review in 2017 and earlier. Now, I understand that none of these organisations had been told about that savings target prior to the 2018 election. When we got in, we were told that, as they were then in Arts SA, had been assigned an efficiency by Treasury, that Arts SA was working to manage, and hopefully it wouldn't see any outcomes, but Treasury was expecting there would be a savings there, and there was a slight increase to that applied in the 2018 budget. And so those efficiencies going forward, we've been able to support those agencies not to feel that impact because, of course, they do provide services to our schools. So in acknowledgement of that, up to now, we've supported that. So going forward, from the 1st of July 2020 is next year, then those agencies are working towards making sure that they've updated their models and their efficiencies so that they can meet that efficiency going forward. I'm not anticipating that we'll be having to add to that challenge as a result of this new Treasury efficiency on the Education Department.
So just so I understand, are you saying that when the previous cuts are realised, I understand you saying those are from past budgets, that these that this won't need to be applied?
This is being applied to the administered items budget in the Education Department, and we are meeting those challenges through other mechanisms. I've identified already, for example, a saving to the Education Department that is greater than this efficiency from the fact that my ministerial office underspent last year by $500,000, and we no longer dragoon in 7 staff from the Education Department offices into the Minister's office. That's no longer an expense that the Education Department has to bear. So those sorts of efficiencies and others around are being met. We're not requiring Carclu, the History Trust and Windmill. We don't want them to stop offering the great services they do to our children in schools. Now, for example, some of those efficiencies the organisations have already been working towards, and so there's been a restructure in the History Trust as a way of example. So the director of the National Motor Museum now has a shared role as director of the Maritime Museum, and that's an efficiency, and it's as part of the History Trust restructure to ensure they'll be able to meet their ongoing efficiency tasks going forward, and some of the money that frees up in the shorter term is able to be spent on other projects, and that's a matter for the History Trust in that example. So
on the History Trust change, are you saying that reducing that director position is has come about because of previous budget decisions, or is that in reaction to this budget decision? Because I had understood that that cut was being made because of this year's budget decision.
Well, it was, as my understanding is, it's a result of previous budget decisions, and I stand to be corrected, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be. I think that staff restructure was more than in discussions. It may have even been communicated with staff prior to this year's budget being released.
Okay. So, in light of that, are you expecting that there will be any cuts to planned performances or exhibitions for any of these agencies as a result of this year's savings efficiencies?
I've met with the three organisations. They've got their letters identifying the funding that will be available to them. To the best of my recollection, I don't think that... Yeah, I'm advised they haven't signalled any changes to planned performances. I was trying to think back to the meetings to see whether any of them had suggested, and I don't recall them doing so. And indeed, because of the work that was done to more accurately reflect the value to schools and the education department, and particularly in early years child development, some of these performing arts programs, for example, that benefit, that value is, and cost is now being supported by the education department in some aspects.
Aside from the History Trust reorganisation with that one director that we discussed a moment ago, which I acknowledge you attribute
there was a more significant reorganisation. That one director was the one that came to mind,
right,
as an example.
Well, my question is, will there be any staff cuts at the three organisations due to these cuts? And if so, which staff?
Not due to these cuts.
Okay. And will there be any cuts to community engagement or educational programs by these three organisations due to these most recently announced cuts?
Look, we and the department will continue to work with all three of the organisations. What does happen in future years will be impacted potentially by the cuts from previous budgets, which these organisations have been given the extra time to prepare for, and the example remains the shared role now that is held by the Director of the Maritime Museum and the Motor Museum, that sort of restructure that's happened at the History Trust. But that's not as a result of, as I say, that was a pre-existing budget restructure to meet the historical efficiencies that were required of Treasury, by Treasury.
Thank you. You mentioned the letters that have gone to each agency. What figures are given to each of the three agencies in those letters in terms of their savings cuts for, savings targets for this financial year?
Well,
I'm happy for you to take it on notice.
Those letters identify the operating grants or whatever the equivalent is if it's not described as an operating grant, and they also describe some of the supplementary funding that will be provided to reflect the benefits that they give to the education department. In terms of cuts, I don't think that there is a cut.
Or savings targets.
I don't think there is a savings target identified for this financial year.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I do have a question. Refers to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 191. Cash outflows, supplies and services SACE Board. Last year was the first time that the SACE had a Stage 2 electronic exam. Minister, could you explain if this will continue in 2019 and be progressed into the future?
I thank the member for McKillop for his interest here, and this is a really important question coming from a regional MP, of course, because one of the significant cohorts of students who we hope will benefit the most indeed from electronic exams is students in regional and rural South Australia. And it's important that we make sure that the infrastructure is up to scratch for those students at those schools. And as we roll out our fibre optic cable to schools across South Australia as part of our internet improvements, I note that the member for McKillop, some of the towns in his area, I think Narracourt was the most recent, joining Bordertown, which had previously had fibre optic cable rolled out to those schools. And for some of those towns, that's going to be a great benefit to the broader community as well. But electronic assessment is particularly important in regards to SACE. It's a key priority from the SACE Board's Strategic Plan 2016 to 2020, represents a shift from traditional paper-based methods of submitting hard copy student materials, marking and moderating this work on paper, enabling students to demonstrate their learning in digital ways. And this strategy culminates in providing a technological solution that allows students to participate in an electronic examination. It recognises the ways that students use computers in their learning and everyday lives in this day and age, and also as the nature of teaching and learning continues to evolve, as technology opens up new forms of learning and creative expression, SACE examinations are also able to evolve. There are things you can do on a computer that you can't do with pen and paper, so we can assess things in new ways, as well as being able to do so more quickly and efficiently as well. We can assess things more creatively. We can maximise the opportunities for students to demonstrate what they've learned, how they can use it in unrehearsed situations, and the extent to which they've developed the capabilities that the SACE expects our students to develop. So the successful delivery of the first electronic examination for Stage 2 English Literacy Studies was last year, leading the nation on the 7th of November. So 2,070 students from 115 schools undertook that exam, and there was an intense body of work to make sure the schools were ready, to make sure that SACE was ready. The program team worked in partnership with schools to prepare for the changes, the technical requirements needed to deliver the exam. Workshops, school visits, extensive engagement, communications, online training, and assisted schools in their preparation, and are really grateful to all of the school principals and the subject leaders in English literacy studies who made sure their students were prepared. So following the exam, the program sought and received feedback from stakeholder groups, including students, SACE coordinators, invigilators, IT managers, and there were also focus groups where a number of students participated and with the members of the program team and the chief executive, and feedback received from the surveys and the focus groups is being utilised for the 2019 plan, where this will continue and indeed will be expanded to include modern history and psychology in addition to the existing English literacy studies, which will continue as well. So 3 subjects this year, and we're looking to continue to explore the functionality that will be required to deliver further examinations in future years, and the SACE Board will provide advice in due course when it's in a position to do so. The team is continuing to work with a third-party vendor on final acceptance of the electronic examination platform. In April of this year, I should also say the SACE Board facilitated a broad electronic assessment conversation with representatives of other states and territories and indeed the Department in New Zealand to foster information sharing, greater collaboration and innovation, as of course all of other jurisdictions are facing similar challenges and they're looking to South Australia to see how it rolls out. So these meetings are going to recur regularly into the future. Is there anything that I've missed? Oh, good news.
I have not only the interest of having been the Minister initially, but also children who are heading towards experiencing it.
I'm sure you'll get the 3 subjects.
You will get feedback, I'm sure. They're not quite at that stage yet, but they're getting very close. I'd like to ask a question relating to the SACE, and therefore from page 167. Can the Minister confirm that the SACE Board has a fund that it can only use if it has permission from Cabinet Treasury to expend that fund?
I'll invite the Chief Executive to answer that question.
Thank you.
Each year when we make savings, those savings go into our reserves, and those reserves are not available to the SACE Board without approval from the Treasurer, as I understand it.
And I think that reflects the
long-standing, that's right. So has the SACE Board asked permission to spend any of those funds in the last year and been denied?
Look, there was never an explicit application to do so. Obviously, whenever we're talking about doing new things, if the government were to expect that, then that's one of the options we can consider. But there has not been a formal approach in any way to do so.
Can the Minister or the Chief Executive give an update on the progress with having SACE taught internationally?
It is a good news story. As the member would know, the SACE International program has been going since 1982. In line with the SACE Board's 2016-2020 strategic plan and supported by myself as the Minister, I suspect the Shadow Minister when she was the Minister, pardon me, certainly since Mr Westwell, Professor Westwell, I should say, has been Chief Executive of the SACE Board, I've been really pleased with the way the SACE Board has been working to enhance this program. The total number of students enrolled in SACE International in 2016 was 706, 2017 was 774, 2018 was 779, 2019 enrolments are estimates based on anticipated commencement dates. Not all schools around the world start on the same day,
That's right.
but we're looking for a figure between 800 and 900.
Good.
And the anticipated gross revenue from SACE International activities in 2017-18 was $902,000. In 2018-19 was $1,087,000, or is anticipated to end up there. And obviously there's significant benefits to the state of the encouraging students into South Australia to do SACE International, or indeed familiarising them with South Australia through them doing SACE in their home countries.
Absolutely. Can the Minister tell me how much is in the SACE reserves and how much of that has come from SACE International, if that's possible?
I'll invite the Chief Executive to answer that question.
The revenue that we receive from the SACE International goes into our budget, and we actually use it to support the work that we do and some of the innovations of the SACE Board.
But how much is in the reserves?
So the reserves we might take on notice, but noting that, as the Chief Executive has just said, the presupposition of the earlier question is incorrect because the international revenue just goes straight into the budget.
Absolutely understand that. Thank you. Can the Minister or the Chief Executive... can the Minister say whether he's formed a view about the impact of the ATAR on the decision by students to undertake specialist maths in particular?
Look, I do have some concerns in this area, as the Shadow Minister is aware, and I know that she shares them because we talked about it, and I think it was a positive discussion. It's one there. The SACE Board provides advice from time to time. Our universities provide advice. We get feedback from schools, but there is certainly, I would suggest, an anecdotal evidence, if nothing else, and I'm fairly certain there's a lot heavier evidence than that some students are choosing not to do what they perceive as more difficult subjects for fear of that having a negative impact on their ATAR, and that's why I believe a number of our universities are working with SATAC and SACE Board, and particularly schooling systems and schools, to suggest novel ways for university entry. I think some universities have described programs where they have offered entry pathways prior to the commencement of Year 12 and prior to students making their final subject choices. And the universities have expressed a preference that if the student wants to get into a certain course, they might be able to do so, so long as they do certain subjects, even if they potentially don't. And the university won't necessarily judge them on their ATAR so long as they achieve a certain standard in those subjects. It's a philosophical discussion. I'm not sure it's directly relevant to the budget line, but it's certainly part of the conversation. I think it's a useful discussion to have, and I actually think it's a worthy use of the committee's time, so thank the member for the question.
Thank you. Badco.
I'd like to move the time for the sitting of committee be extended beyond 1 p.m.
Is that seconded, member for Port Adelaide? Is that seconded?
Yes, it is.
Oh, because I'm very happy to go to lunch at 1 p.m. Well, I'll put that at once.
A little mini tangent.
Any to the contrary? No? Thank you. That's carried. Member for Badco.
Thank you, sir. Budget paper 5, page 27, just following on from the earlier questions from me. I just want to be clear about this from my understanding of what your answer was previously. Am I correct in understanding that although this $472,000 per year is in the budget papers as an efficiency each year, you don't expect to enforce that?
The $472,000 indicates a reflection of what Treasury is providing us in our administration and support for these organisations. Separate to that, there are also previous identified efficiencies that impact on what Treasury provides to the Education Department or whoever else, Arts SA as it previously was. And then there is a relationship between these organisations and the department. Currently the Department for Education, previously the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and I'm pretty sure it was somebody else before that previously. So in terms of the support that these organisations will receive from the agency that is currently responsible for them, they will continue to receive support along a similar line to what they had last year, notwithstanding that they know that they've got to deal with these efficiencies that are long-standing.
Is it possible to get a copy of the letters that have been sent to each of the agencies outlining the letters we spoke about earlier?
I don't think it's usual practice for me to give them out. They're a letter from me to the agencies. It may well be that the member can avail herself of the usual format to get them, and I suspect that that might achieve the letter in an earlier time than estimates responses would be able to get her, so she might like to avail herself of that mechanism.
Sure. I was also going to ask a few questions relating to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 166. My questions relate to the Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People. I understand that this Commissioner can't investigate individual cases from an answer you so kindly provided as a response to a question on notice earlier this year. Could you tell me what key performance indicators the Commissioner does have, and whether, for example, you've received any issues-based reports from the Commissioner since she started her role?
Look, to enable the... I can go into some detail, but to enable the opposition to have at least one more question in this round, I'll take that on notice and provide full information in due course rather than providing half an hour, an hour.
Thank you very much. Your response may be the same to my next question, which is in relation to the Guardian for Children and Young People. Of course, the Guardian does investigate individual cases. I wondered how many cases had been referred to you as Minister in the time that the Guardian's been in your purview.
Well, I make the point that the Guardian's role is a bit different to the Commissioner for Children and Young People, and the Guardian has, in terms of functional role, is more aligned with the Minister for Child Protection. So we are responsible in the Education Department. The Oversight Bodies Act is committed to us, and so we have some relationship which is largely as a funding body and a landlord, if you like, for the Guardian for Children and Young People.
Does she report to you, or do the reports generally go straight to the other minister?
Look, to assist the member, I'll take it on notice to the extent that in relation to clearing up for the member the manner of the reporting lines.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you, Minister. There being no further questions, I declare the examination of proposed payments for the portfolio administered items completed.